So imagine that you're a nurse on a dementia care unit. One of the care recipients comes to you and asks, "Is my husband visiting today?" You know that her husband died some years ago. How should you respond and why? Now imagine you're a hospital manager. It's come to your attention that on one of the medical units that you're responsible for, there is poor care. Patients are not receiving the care they need. And also that there's clearly an associated lack of professionalism. How should you respond and why? These questions are ethical questions. These questions relate to the shoulds and oughts of professional life. Responses to these questions make the most profound difference to the lives of individuals and to organisational cultures. You might have favoured a fast response to these questions. You might perhaps have thought, well, obviously the nurse should tell the truth. Obviously, the manager should roll out some ethics training, and maybe along the lines of we heard recently of a coffee shop chain who rolled out such a workshop. So I want to argue what we need in such situations, what we need in relation to the shoulds and oughts of everyday professional practice is not fast, but slow. I'm pitching for slow ethics that has 4 components. It starts with stories, it requires ethical sensitivity, it needs space and time to flourish, and it draws on scholarship, interdisciplinary and cross-cultural scholarship. Some years ago, on a mini break in Stockholm, I came across an exhibition on slow art. The artifacts in the exhibition were exquisite. There was a necklace that was made of broken eggshells and pearls, threaded through with gold wire. There were delicate slippers, handmade from Japanese satin, pins and varnish. There was a porcelain bowl that was made of individually handcrafted rose petals put together without toes. The spiel that related to the exhibition was seductive. It spoke of quality over quantity. It spoke of time to do things well. It spoke of integrity and courage. The integrity and courage we need to do one thing over a long timescale. As I was attending the exhibition, I'd left the UK at a time when we were reeling from yet another care scandal. A hospital in Scotland, I do apologise, a hospital in England, it was found. A hospital in England, it was found that over 400 patients died unnecessarily from poor care. Understandably, there was a rush to respond. There were any number of knee-jerk reactions. There was something approaching moral panic. People spoke of a crisis of compassion. And one of the things that happened was there was a rollout of training for colleagues who worked in our health services. So you can imagine, I was at this exhibition at this moment on slow art, and I had an epiphany. I wondered if insights from the slow movement could impact on my own area of professional ethics. So I rushed home, I went online, and I ordered all the books I could on the slow movement. And what I found was that the slow movement started in 1986 with an Italian called Carlo Petrini. He was concerned about the setting up in Rome of a fast food chain. So he wanted to bring about an approach to food that was much more ethical and appropriate. So he set up the slow food movement. Slow food It favours flavour over fast. It favours local produce over offerings from global chains. And it's very much about, again, taking time to appreciate what is important. Since then, we've had any number of subsections of the slow movement. We have slow travel, some of you will know about. We have slow work, some of you will like. And more recently, we've had slow medicine. So this is really catching on. A book that I had most impact on me was a book called In Praise of Slowness by Carl Honore. And his book begins with a story. And he tells the story of being at an airport, rushing through an airport, and he sees the 1-minute bedtime storybook. At the time, he tells us, he was involved in a sort of nightly routine of reading to his, which was beginning to feel onerous, reading to his 2-year-old son. And he just realized it takes a lot of time and he wanted to do it quicker. So he thought this book would be the answer to his problems. He wanted to read his email, to watch the news, to have supper, and so on. And then he stopped and he asked, have I gone completely insane? So Honore's book, In Praise of Slowness, reminds us that we live in frantic times. We engage with speed and we're continuously absorbed in multitasking. Honore and the slow movement remind us there is another way to be. So from this, I brought to bear insights from the slow movement to my own field to professional ethics and concluded that what we need is a slow ethics with 4 components. The first one is stories. Arthur Frank writes about stories, and he says that stories work with us, stories work for us, and always stories work on us. Stories have a moral impact. They help us to decide what is worth doing and what is best avoided. Stories also have impact on our sensitivity. Sensitivity relates to our understanding of others and also to our ethical approach to those others. So we have 2 components, stories and sensitivities that arise from those stories. The third element is space and time. In work we've done with residential care workers, we found that caregivers benefit hugely from getting together and discussing the everyday elements of their care practices, the everyday ethical aspects of their care practices. The 4th area is scholarship. There is a lot of scholarship that we can bring to bear on our moral lives. The obvious one you would think about is moral philosophy and ethics, of course. And that helps us to really think carefully about the shoulds and oughts of our professional practice. But we shouldn't stop there. The moral life is complex. We need to draw on other disciplines. So, for example, social psychology, sociology, and also, of course, the law, and of course, the arts. We learn a lot from engagement with the arts in terms of understanding the moral life in our professional practice. So, how does all of this impact on our stories that we began with, the scenarios of the nurse and the manager? So the nurse, it's very helpful for her to engage, or him indeed, engage with the stories relating to the care recipient. Who is the care recipient? What is their story? What has worked well in relation to this care recipient in the past? In the time we had with caregivers in residential care, they shared with us strategies to respond to just such a situation. They told us that when a care recipient who experienced dementia asked such a question, is my husband visiting today, it very much depended on who they were. It very much depended on their story. So they honed their ethical sensitivity through conversations. So they told us that for one care recipient, what worked best was maybe to enable them to work with us and do some tasks, for example, laying a table. For another, what worked best was to engage them in conversation. How did you and your husband meet, for example? What worked best for another was in advising to tell the older person that their husband had died some years ago. The care recipients also told us that they valued hugely the time and space to talk about their everyday professional practice and the ethical issues that arose, and they also learned from each other. They also could draw on scholarship. There's an abundant scholarship on ethics in truth-telling in relation to dementia, for example, and this is something that people can learn from and integrate into their practice. So with the nurse, again, you see for the 4 elements of story, sensitivity, scholarship, and space and time. So what about the manager? Some different issues, some very significant issues, if indeed there's a poorly performing team, and they impact negatively on the well-being of care recipients. So the manager also needs to listen to their story. Who are they? Who is the leader? And in fact, are they having ethical leadership? Does this team have the resources they need to do this job well? He also needs to create time and space to listen well. Iris Murdoch talks and writes a lot about attentiveness in ethics and moral perception, and she talks about looking with a just and loving eye. As we well know, whenever there's a scandal, there's a rush to demonise individuals and to downplay organisational culture. So the manager, with the reports of the poorly performing team, needs to engage with the team overall, needs to consider individuals, needs to consider the team, the organisation, and indeed the wider social structure. So space and time also is relevant to him. He can also, or she indeed, can also gain from engaging with scholarship. There's a lot of scholarship in relation to the ethical climate or the ethical culture of organisations, and indeed we can learn from the many reports of unethical practice that we've had in relation to professional life. So where does all this take us? I'm pitching for slow ethics in professional life. I'm recommending that we resist quick fix solutions and short-term answers to our ethical predicaments in professional life. I'm suggesting that we engage with the 4 S's of slow ethics and take time to do what we do well. I'm also suggesting that as you go forth, you go slowly. We don't rush our answers, we take seriously the complexity of professional life and the inevitability of ethics within that life. Thank you.